What is the current state of recruitment in the event industry? How has it changed over the last 5 years? And how does the conflict in the Middle East affect the jobs market? To discuss this and the future of recruitment, I'm joined by Robert Kenwood. Robert is a recruitment strategist with 25 years' experience advising senior leaders across events, MICE, and experiential sectors. He's recognised as an industry voice who blends honesty, humour, and hard won experience. Before we get started, a big thank you to our partners for their continued support, Vivid Inc. and Eventflow. More about them at the end of the episode. So, Robert, how do we get to where we are now? How is the job prospects changed over the last 5 years or so?
It's been an interesting one. Obviously, 5 years takes us back to the pandemic, and I almost think that the pandemic and COVID, it was like it created a reset for recruitment and the standards and salaries. There was almost like a sort of hiring boom after COVID. It was a bit of it was actually quite chaotic. That first year or two after COVID was chaotic. The market corrected itself a little bit, and I think now we're in a much more sort of like considered phase. Like 5 years ago, we were like trying to survive, you know, as in work wise. So 2 years, it was like sort of panic hiring. Now, very much precision. And it used to be, there was like they talk about candidate and employee power, and I really hate those phrases, but it's much more balanced now because I think there's been a shift from like volume hiring, let's get six people into value hiring. What do we need, who do we need, and what do we need to take the business forwards? And the drum I always bang, Bob, is employers need to really think less about filling the seat that they've got in front of them and more about fixing problems that are coming down the road. That's what I've seen.
So it's almost like filling the need. So your business has got a problem to solve, and now it's much more considered when it comes to choosing the right candidate.
I think recruitment's always been very reactive, unfortunately. You speak to employers and they've all got sales strategy, marketing strategy, and you ask them what their recruitment strategy is. And I would say two-thirds of them don't have an actual recruitment strategy. It's very knee-jerk, very reactionary. And that's one of the biggest problems in our industry, is that we recruit for what's in front of us, or recruit mates referrals, which is the second biggest problem, I think, in our industry.
So not so much in the way of long-term planning, maybe short to mid, in your view?
Short, yes, 100%. Mid, sort of. A lot of companies now, in fairness, a lot of companies don't really know what's 3 years down the line. You can have a business plan of where you want to go, but you can't really be as sure as maybe before where you were going to be in 3 years as a business. So, recruitment when you're hiring, I specialize in senior hires. They're the leaders that are going to take your business there. So you've got to have a 3, 5, and 7 year thought process if it's not going to be called a business plan. And I think companies are now trying to align their hiring with that rather than, like I say, just filling what's in front of them.
Yeah, we've gone through quiet quitting. We've gone through people going, well, I'm never paid enough for doing this. I'll do it on my own, and becoming self-employed and starting up their own businesses. So with all of that in mind, what is the state of employment today in 2026?
Yeah, I mean, you know, hiring hasn't stopped. I know there's a lot of negativity about recruitment. It hasn't stopped. It's slowed down, and it's slowed down on purpose because obviously, we've just had what's going on over in the Middle East, and that has affected not only global uncertainty, like the global, the international market, but also the Middle East was quite a destination for a lot of corporates, brands. It was a big area where people were spending money and doing stuff. So that has put a lot of things on pause. A lot of pins are going in, but to be honest, Bob, the industry year in, year out, and I've been in it, God, 10 years on my own, 15 years, 20 years, can't remember how long I've been in it now, but the industry does the same thing every single year. A third of it struggles, a third of it does okay, and a third of it is rocking and rolling. And that, no matter where we are, a recession, a war, whatever the situation, that will continue. But the market is quieter, but it's more selective. And this phrase I was using the other day with Jill actually was this like almost hiring. Like I've had conversations even today, 4 different MDs I've been talking to, and they're like, "Look, we're thinking of doing this. When should we do it?" And obviously, I want to say now, but they can't push that button. So I think hiring more junior level is up in the Q1 for 2026. Absolutely, I see that a lot. People are wanting a lot of people to come and deliver what they've got, but budget caution, global uncertainty, that always equals hesitation. There's less noise, but the conversations that are happening, if that makes sense, and they matter more. That's my advantage.
Yeah. You mentioned how it's a little more subdued, the hiring process, a bit quieter. Is that due to, you think, to not just what's happening in the Middle East, but economic pressures as well?
Yeah, I mean, in the UK, of course, national insurance, the employment bill, companies getting hammered left, right, and centre. That is obviously going to have a knock-on effect to hiring. Um, But what it means is the people that are being hired because they can add value. And that's the thing. They're bringing in people. You might have had budget to bring in 3 different people now. Now you bring in one that can do 2 jobs, if you see what I mean. There's not a lot of fat anymore around those jobs, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, you mentioned Jill, that'd be Jill Hawkins, who herself has
Yes.
got quite a bit of experience within the industry.
Yeah.
Um, you also mentioned the Middle East. I think we're all aware as we record this episode, just what's going on and how complicated it's become. And there's a lot of people coming back from the Middle East
Yeah.
for whatever, probably for they feel it's a risky situation at the moment and they don't feel safe. But obviously, they're coming back, probably looking for work. So I guess that's putting extra pressure on the job market, as well as mergers and acquisitions. And also, we've got people coming out of education.
Yeah. I mean, the Middle East is there's 2 main reasons. Obviously, safety. There's also professional. There are not as many jobs in event and experiential agencies based in the Middle East as there were before because the budgets have taken and no one's doing the activation. So people need money, so they're coming home. But people are obviously feeling unsafe in the region, so they're coming home. And I mentioned this before on something else I did. I think that sort of initial gold rush of everybody running to the Middle East, as it was seen, absolutely brilliant. If you wanted to do that, fantastic, fair play to you. I think they won't go back in the same droves as the initial was. I think there'll be a lot more hesitation around, okay, we've told everything's okay now, let's go back. I don't see that happening. And you're absolutely right. The knock on effect in that is yes, we have more people coming into the job market. So theoretically, you'd think, well, that's great. There's more people around, there's better choice. But unfortunately, if we're still using the same antiquated recruitment processes, knee jerk fill a gap, you've just got more people to choose from. So actually, you're going to make more bad decisions because you're looking at a wider talent pool. And that talent pool has got different expectations now, salary wise, working practices, their mindset has changed.
Yeah. Oh, another interesting figure that I came across, UK events industry is currently valued, well, it was valued in 2025 as 68.7 billion, with growth projected 3 to 5% annually through to 2027. So it sounds from that like there's going to be quite a lot of opportunities.
I mean, the UK is 100% seen as like, US may be because of size, but the UK is seen as, the mecca of the holy grail of the events industry, both for the professionalism, for the creativity, for the type of work, for the agencies we've got here. For a relatively small island, you look at the amount of agencies and big players that are based here. We are seen as like a sort of barometer of the market, and rightly so. And we should be very proud of that. And we don't talk about that enough. We always talk about the US and Middle East and these sort of things, but we're a country that is seen as like the or one of the top players in the entire sector.
And also with some really spectacular events that take place, not just the large music festivals, but we have a lot of other big events that are going on. So it's an amazing training ground.
Yeah, but also it's not just about where those events are held. It's, you go where the businesses are, and those businesses are here. But I'd say what 50% of what the UK market does is global. It's not all held in the UK. And in fact, some of the knock-on I'm hearing is venues and agencies getting a lot of overspill of work that isn't now happening in the Middle East, and they're looking to bring it. Where do you go? Okay, let's go to the UK.
Yeah, one of the contributing factors to think about various events and shows and conferences coming back to the UK is simply the insurance is probably not, well, it's probably too expensive over
Yeah.
in that part of the world. So that's also a consideration. Um, well, the Event School London has recently been they've been approved by Ofqual, Office of
Hmm.
Qualifications, for their new diplomas. How much of a difference is that going to make to potential employment, especially when it comes to the young people? I'm not going to singly say it's only young people because anybody can go at any age
Yeah.
into education for events.
Well, I think the same with anything. I'm a great, big, massive, huge fan of education. But I think for me, it's all very positive, but it's not like the silver bullet that some people try and paint education as, because education is about, showing that there's a way into the industry. Education is showing that, it's not just even now I've been in it for however long I have, it's not pink and fluffy like all my parents were like, what are you doing in events? That's it's parties. Education says this is a serious career. This is a proper career, a career of choice. The problem is the industry, as in employers, still need, as well as attitude and personality and stuff, but they still need things like commercial awareness. They still need things like experience. So there is, I think, some sort of disconnect there. Yeah, but it's great for an entry point, but I think we need that to be a bit more structured. But there's a disconnect there because you've got employers asking for, 3 years experience in events and paying basic minimum, national minimum wage. And that's just unrealistic because those jobs should be taken by, the new talent coming in. That should be their first step, not a job for someone that's been in the industry 3 years, because otherwise your education, your graduates, your students, they're not never going to get a foot into the market. And I think having those structured entry points, it it shortens the learning curve. Absolutely. If someone's gone through an education and graduated, they're hitting the ground running almost. But it can't ever replace experience because unfortunately we are still run by how many years have you done it rather than what have you done in those years, which that is changing. And I think sometimes with education, I do a lot of work with universities through the Reach Scholarship, the EDI scholarship. Um, and I think sometimes that sort of expectation versus reality can be blurred, which I get that. And as an industry, we do not struggle to attract people, Bob. We don't struggle to get people wanting to come into it. We just struggle to get the right people and retain the right people because we misuse this. There are lots of, 30 under 30 rising stars, which is great, but we don't want to burn them out, like be great and burn for 5 years and 10 years. We want them in the industry for 20 years. So I think there's a lot to do between the education and the employers. But anything, that is anything like the diploma is hugely positive because that's somewhere in a government machine or an education machine saying that event industry over there, that's a career. That's not just mucking about. That's a proper. And you said a figure earlier. Last time I heard it from the business of events meeting, it was 90 billion. That is, and we didn't even have sick codes up until like last year. We were all shoved in with hospitality. They didn't know about us, but now they do. We've got our own sick codes, which are, for tax purposes, so they can press a button in the number 10 and say, oh, what's this event thing? Oh, look, it's 90 billion pounds. That's insane. That's insane.
That is incredible, and it's a massive that's a massive amount of money. It just also demonstrates how the UK is performing within the how events contributes to the UK economy. But are people still thinking when they hear somebody's working in events? are people still thinking, oh, you must plan weddings? Is that still that sort of misconception about what event people actually do? I know that events covers a massive umbrella of activities, and we
Yeah.
really need to divide that up to some better terminology. But essentially, are we seeing, is there a problem there where people don't see the event industry as a career path, or just sees it as
If I,
something that people don't do?
I think the latter more. I think people don't see it as not a career. You just don't know events. Before I got into it, I would go to an annual sales conference or a networking event. I didn't know how it happened. I just knew I went to this event. If you've only been to weddings in your life and someone says events, then you're going to think weddings. And even in our own industry, we have events, we have mice, meetings, incentives, conferences, exhibitions. Then you have experiential, and even experiential is split into activations, experiences, and then you've got internal. It's never ending, so we can't sort it out ourselves. But yeah, in shorter answer to your question, if you've never had visibility, the government, Bob, didn't know about us. If you've never had visibility of this £90 billion sector, you can't really have an opinion of it. It's only when you see it, and this is why I think a lot of people fall into the industry. You know that phrase, we fell into the industry? It's because it was invisible.
I hate that phrase of falling into
No,
the
I get it.
industry.
I get it, but it's because it was invisible. I
Yeah.
came into it. I was in recruitment for 10 years. My old boss was like, "Oh, I've gone into the events industry," and I was like, "Great, what's that?" And she told me about it, and I came into it. And was like, that was it. I was in love, but I would never have applied for a job in an events industry because I've never been in events and I don't know what events do. So I think you're right. It's not a nice phrase, falling into it, because it makes it sound lucky or that it's easy. But the industry is like you sort of didn't know it existed.
The reason I hate that phrase so much is because when you say you're falling into it, you've actually chosen to stay. So you didn't fall into it by accident because you've chosen to stay within the industry and that
Ah, but
is
that's
your
two different
career.
things, Bob, isn't it? That's two different things. You can fall into it and then you can choose to stay, or you can fall into it and leave because you didn't like it. But I think you
Well,
still fall into it.
if you've fallen into it, decided it wasn't for you and left, then you didn't fall into it because you've left. I know it's pedantic, I know. It's
Yeah,
just I
I'll
just
leave that
don't
with
like
you.
that
I'll leave
phrase.
that with you.
Thank you so much. So we can finish up because I'd like to know what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months, or maybe further if you've got some, if you've got your crystal ball out and you're going to look at the
Hmm.
future. How is the
I,
state of recruitment going to be, for say, 6 to 12 months or longer?
I mean, it's no nobody knows. Like that is the short answer. I'm very fortunate that I sit in a really interesting position that every single day, even today, I've spoke to two MDs and a CEO. Every day I'm speaking to senior leaders, owners in the industry, and they're all telling me what's happening. So I can piece together those dots and form. That's why my trends come from. They are intel gathering, but nobody really knows what's going on with recruitment in 6 to 12 months because we don't know what's happening globally, but we also you're lying if you pretend you know, because businesses don't know. Any recruiter is not the person driving that change anyway, it's the employers. But the employers are saying, and I can see this has happened for about 18 months, roles are becoming much more specialist, like much more specialist than generalist. And I'm working with clients to really get them to be clearer on what do you actually need? What are you willing to pay for rather than who's available? And I think that's definitely coming to the fore with companies. I think the split role, the one thing I can tell I know is the sales side of things. That sort of split between a salesperson and a sales, closer and stuff. Those sort of roles are splitting, and so is the creative and the execution. But we went for a period of a year or two ago where creative got merged a bit into execution or delivery. Whereas again, that's being split now because end user clients, as in brands and companies, they're willing to pay for creativity again. Um, very. I think the flexibility around working is here to stay. But I think the next thing that's going to happen to that is about pay. I can definitely see companies looking at, if I've got half my workforce living in, I don't know, Bristol, and we're paying for this office in London and they're only coming in 2 days a week, why am I paying them London wages when they're living in Bristol? So I can definitely see that come. And also with the time of things, I just thank God companies are thinking about it. But I think what will happen is what we're seeing is instead of it being how many hours have you worked, how many days, and what time, it's like, what have you done? That's what we've got to get to. What have you done? And with agencies, companies themselves, the companies that are, that third that I told you about, the companies that
Yeah.
are rocking and rolling, they're companies that have got a real strong positioning and USP as specialists. So rather than like we can do everything, they're like, no, we are the best at this. You can be good at two things and great at one. It's one of my favorite phrases. But I think agencies or companies, employers are now saying, hang on, we don't want that work over there because we're really good here. So I think that sort of that is what I see, what I hear, and what I try to promote with people is, get away from, and it is starting to happen, but employers will start to have those conversations about what roles they need, where are the gaps, what's the succession planning before it kicks you in the nuts, basically, because the market hasn't got worse. The recruitment market hasn't got worse. It's just grown up a bit. And I think that's also internal teams and hiring teams and things like that. And the businesses that adapt, they'll hire better, retain better. And obviously, Bob, that then leads to perform better.
Yeah. One very last thing then, because I keep saying it. This is the last thing. You mentioned remote team members.
Mm.
I mean, there was a great big sort of battle cry for back to the office. How does work from home or split between like a few days at home and a few days in office, how does that fit into what you're seeing?
I think we also need to be careful of what the media is telling us, by the way, because all of that WPP and all of that saying we're going back to the office, that's not true. I know many people that work in those big marketing advertising agencies. Those sort of announcements are made for shareholders. They're not actually, you're not going to get told off for not being in the office. It's just not true. But businesses now in our side of things, 3 days a week in the office is standard now. Like that is anything more than that, you're pushing it. Anything less than that, then well done. But I think 3 days a week, but also it's not just that you're just in the office, it's also what you're doing with that time in the office. Because when we're at home, we actually work. There's this whole myth around we're more productive at home. No, we're not. We actually just get more done. There used to be a 3 hour commute, or a 2 hour commute, a round trip. Now we're in the office. We're getting in the office straight away, working through lunch breaks, or pop in there in the evening. I'll pop out there on Saturday. I'll pop up there on Saturday. We're actually doing more, not because we're more productive, because but I suppose. Well, actually, let me change that. Yes, we're more productive because we don't have somebody knocking on our shoulder or getting us a cup of tea and all that sort of stuff. But I think people are actually just working more from home, and that could be good and bad. But I think senior leaders or leaders definitely, you can't lead a team unless or want them in the office unless you're in the office or unless you're showing them. We're going to see that in the next 3 to 5 years. Where are our next senior leaders coming from, or our next heads of department, if we've got a whole 5 year, 10 year cohort of people who have never been around people? They don't understand emotional intelligence. They don't understand, oh, I've just seen someone that looks sad. Let's go and put an arm around them. Or that person, all of those little nuances, they are what made you, me, be good at what we did because you were surrounded by those people, but they're not surrounded by those people now. So I think we've just got to be a bit careful that remote for me, and remote means never having to go into an office. Remote is not, if I was an employer, that is not an option on the table. Like, I just don't understand how people can run a business remote long term, and do all the things you really want to do. So for me, yeah, the flexibility is more around fixed flexibility. 3 days in the office, 2 days at home. I think if you go back before the pandemic, Bob, and imagine saying to someone, "Oh, I'd like to work from home one day a week," you can imagine, the second word would have been off. And I'm not one of these
Yeah.
old boy. I'm not one of these old boys that's like, oh, it was different in my era. But I think we have to appreciate that it's called work because we get paid to do it. We wouldn't do it for free. You have to go and work to get paid. That's the very nature of it. But 3 days in office, 2 days at home. That's what I would have bit your hand off at. That's a lovely mix.
That's a balancing of it's no, it's not a balance. It's less concentration on have you done your 9 to 5, but have you managed to get the project that you're working on, or
Yeah,
whatever it is you're working, have you moved it? Have you completed it? Have you provided your what you were required to do to the next person so they can finish? So less on hours, but more on have you done what you needed to do?
yeah, and you're spot on, and that'll be the next stage of evolution. It will be 4-day weeks, or condensed hours, or 6-hour days. You think about that. That is where we're going, and we need to go. But yeah, maybe when I'm sat in a rocking chair somewhere, that'll happen.
Oh, if that happens, I'm going to come back and interview you again.
Well, it will happen. It will. I genuinely see that happening. But otherwise, we'll lose. You have to realise that we can't keep going, oh, millennials, or oh, Gen whatever, or oh, the young people. If you're getting told that there's a whole workforce out there that doesn't want to work the way we did, and you refuse to change, then that workforce is not going to come into our industry, and we will wither and die. So adapt or die, as the phrase goes.
Over the last, I don't know, what, 10, 15 years, if you ever told your parents you was going to be an influencer or make money from social media, they
Yeah.
would have just told you, no, just go get a job. Go get a job, 9 to 5, like we had to. But I think it's not been proven wrong. It's just proven there are alternatives, and working from home is an alternative. Again, it depends on
Yeah.
the person and the business.
No, definitely, definitely.
Right. I think we've got that. Thank you so much for your time.
No worries.
Huge thanks to Robert for his time, and a big thank you to our partners for their continued support. Vivid Inc., PR and social media marketing specialists for the event industry, and Eventflow, the secret weapon for event teams who've had it with PDF exhibitor manuals. Before we finish up, how do you feel about recruitment and the state of the job market? I would love to hear what you think. Head over to EPN Journal Community, link is in the show notes, and find out how you can share your thoughts. Thanks for listening.